Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video I'd like to talk about Doctor Who once again, following up loosely on my top 10 classic series stories for Doctor Who. I got to thinking that maybe it'd be nice to actually talk a little bit about why they're on this list from my perspective, my own unique perspective. And so I'm going to be covering them in the same chronological order that I listed them originally. With my first choice, it was the Aztecs, and this one, I love the period setting. I'm somebody who has always admired Earth history and things like ancient Egypt and, of course, the Mayan culture, even the Aztec cultures, what we know of them and everything like that. It's always fascinated me, the pyramids and the architecture, the structures. Looking back at all of that stuff, it still exists today in South America, I believe. And for this particular story, it had a lot of interesting aspects to it, ranging from, as I referenced in my previous top 10 recital, the Doctors unknowingly becoming engaged. Basically, you have each of the companions really focused in a sort of showcase, in that Ian has to be made out to be a warrior. He has to kind of beat the best warrior of this Aztec village, this community, in order for him to seem as though he has any worth. Similarly to that, you have Susan being made to be schooled for her vocalizations against certain of the archaic rules and regulations, and she's supposed to be the servant of, and this is where it really takes an interesting twist, Barbara, who is thought to be the goddess Yetaxa, sort of a god, reincarnated and that kind of thing, because essentially the TARDIS lands inside of a tomb. They come out of it, and of course the village elders see this and think, gods? Coming in number 2 was Dalek Invasion of Earth, and this is a story set in the future. It's also the last to feature Susan Foreman, the Doctor's granddaughter. He leaves her behind at the end of the story, and this is definitely sort of the reason you want to go back to this one. But also, if you're a fan of the Daleks' history in Doctor Who, I just love the aspect of all of these downtrodden human beings in a very bleak-looking future where the Daleks have invaded the Earth, and semi-successfully, I might add. You begin to feel for them much in a similar way to how Susan falls in love with one of them. And seeing those people rise above the challenges that the Daleks represent with the Doctor's help, and then, of course, that emotional weight toward the end of the story that sees Susan departing. Coming in at number 3 was The Time Meddler. Now, this one, again, is a historical piece that I absolutely love, just the vibe and the setting. The most notable things are the fact that you have the Vikings and the Saxons going up against each other. You have the Time Meddler himself, the monk, the meddling monk, who is, although we don't know, the Doctor hails from Gallifrey at this point in the history of the show, is one of the Doctor's own kind. And you see him trying to sort of mess around with history. It's almost like if the Doctor were malevolent, this might be the kind of thing he'd be doing. And the Doctor really doesn't take kindly to it and leaves him, by the end, in a bad way. And so, once again, the historical uprising, the clash of the Saxons versus the Vikings, the Doctor having to deal with the monk, setting things straight again, setting history on the right course again, makes this an invaluable watch. Coming in at number 4 was Tomb of the Cybermen. Not much needs to be said about this one. It's my favorite Patrick Troughton story. It's a future archaeological sort of expedition where people are trying to uncover technology hidden away in the, as the title suggests, lost tombs of the Cybermen, and they end up awakening the Cybermen, testing out various of their technologies. You have a couple of nefarious people amongst the crowd. You have Jamie and Victoria as the companions. Victoria has a very sentimental moment with the Second Doctor about loss, losing family and loved ones and friends, and how over time there's a healing process, but you can always recollect those people, and they're always with you, and that kind of thing. And so it's just an all-around awesome story. Coming in for my 5th choice was Inferno, and the best thing I can say about this one is mirror universe, parallel world. The Third Doctor is whisked away to a sort of authoritarian and very militaristic alternate universe where people like the Brigadier and his companion Liz Shaw are absolutely psychotically militant. It was just a fascinating look into the idea of parallel dimensions in the fact that this mirror world, if you will, or offshoot world, was a little ahead of ours by, degrees, by a certain amount of hours, and they were heading toward a similar destruction to the world the Doctor left behind, our regular world. He had to race against time to find a way to get back to where he came from and stop this mining being that was going on. That was kind of the crux of that story, that was heading toward a very destructive level. And there's an aspect of people becoming possessed with this negative energy, becoming mutated and stuff like that. Very fascinating story, and that's why it's on this list. So coming in at number 6 was my choice, Genesis of the Daleks. If you've ever seen this, you can probably assume why. It's a fascinating story where the Time Lords enlist the Doctor into going back in time, and you know, it's arguable whether this is kind of the start of the Time War between the Time Lords and the Daleks, because they want him to cease the formation of the Daleks back at the very start of their existence from their creator, Davros, and suppress what Davros is essentially trying to do, which is nuke the entire planet, where the Doctor encounters this dilemma of, you know, do I have the right to destroy these beings, even though I know they will become evil and all the hell they'll wreak on the universe? The Doctor really has to weigh that heavily, and luckily he doesn't necessarily have to come to a decision. But coming in at number 7 was Pyramids of Mars, and this is a story that features one of my favorite eras of world history, ancient Egypt, with the super powerful villain, one of the most super powerful villains the Doctor's ever encountered, Sutekh, the Destroyer. And this being, you know, was said to be part of a race that even the Time Lords couldn't have hoped to sort of rein in if they had so tried. Sutekh actually brings the Doctor to his knees at one point in the story. And one of the things I love are the two brothers in the story. One is dead and basically a walking automaton servant of Sutekh's, and the other is a very sort of compassionate, if timid, character, having to experience the loss of his brother and everything like that. Just a really momentous story in the history of Doctor Who. Following on that was Talons of Weng-Chiang at number 8. The Victorian Gothic feel to it, the presence, the cinematography, everything like that. You had the Doctor, of course, the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker, walking around in almost Sherlock Holmes attire with Leela in tow. And you have this overarching sort of mystery. What exactly is going on? Women are going missing. It seems to correspond to this particular show, this magic show that's being put on. And it's just very fascinating to see Tom Baker walk in as the Doctor, very Sherlock Holmesian in his performance, and just own everything. There's a giant rat that almost eats Leela, and it's just absolutely fantastic story. Coming in at number 9 was the choice I referenced as being probably the most controversial on my list, Mark of the Rani. And this is because most Rani stories are seen in a very poor light, or, you know, people can take or leave them, especially her second time around, where she, you know, knocks the Doctor over and he regenerates. So, but this particular story, the reason I love it is, again, an atmosphere, cinematography, the time that this takes place in, very industrial revolutionary kind of age. And you have the 6th Doctor, portrayed by Colin Baker, being the closest, in my personal opinion, to any of the Doctors we know and love. You know, I mean, he's known for being sort of outspoken, very ornery, very quippy and stuff like that, and even derogatory to a certain extent, especially with companion Perry. But in this particular story, I felt he was most Doctor-like, for lack of a better term, and facing off not only against the Rani, who's a very meticulous Time Lady, Time Lord, whatever you want to call her, something very different from the Master, who also appears in this story, Anthony Ainley's version of the Master, to be specific, who is always malevolent and just all-out crazy. So I love the meeting of the minds from the extreme to the sort of highly technical, and a very Doctor-like Doctor having to face off against them. And finally, rounding out the list at number 10 was Remembrance of the Daleks, Sylvester McCoy's 7th Doctor and Ace in tow. And it has a very sort of strong hearkening back to the story that started it all, really, in the history of the series, An Unearthly Child, and that we revisit Coal Hill School, and there's Daleks aplenty, of course. There's sort of a revolution of the Daleks, if you will, where it's two sides of Daleks against each other. That is unfolding in present-day 60s London. And, of course, there are also hints at the Doctor's original hiding away on Earth to begin with. Before his first earthly companions, the teachers Ian and Barbara, who followed Susan back to that wonderful TARDIS, you know, for the very first time in the first story, the Doctor had a purpose for being there. And it's very intriguing what this all has to do with and how this thing that he's there for comes into play toward the end of the story. And so, yeah, if you're watching this video, I hope you enjoyed this somewhat more in-depth look at why I made these particular choices for my top 10 classic series stories in the history of Doctor Who. That'll be pretty much it for me on this. I hope this video finds you well. I'll catch you all later. Peace.